There's really two main differences between a co-op and a condo that usually get people to decide which route they want to take.
Welcome to the John and Jonathan Sell NYC podcast, where experienced, expert New York City real estate brokers John Gostaska and Jonathan Conlin break down what's happening in the market, what you need to know whether you're a buyer, seller, or agent, and their insight into the future with a little bit of fun along the way. In this episode, John and Jonathan discuss the highs and lows of their experiences this week in New York City's real estate market, as well as the differences in purchasing a cooperative and a condominium. Buying real estate here is like nowhere else in the world, and John and Jonathan will break down all the nuances, as well as dispel some commonly held misconceptions.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to John and Jonathan Sell NYC podcast. Mr. Conlin, you are on. How are you?
I changed my V-neck to a black shirt this week because, as you can see, still at home.
You still got your haircut.
And I did get my haircut.
Very handsome.
I think this is the first one with the haircut. Thank goodness.
How was your week? Why don't you start with your week this week?
Well, I was in the city quite a bit, which is actually, it's funny. We talked about the other day. It's exhausting to go into the city, to put the mask on, to be always, for me anyways, I feel sort of hyper vigilant on who's around me. Are they wearing a mask? Am I touching anything? All the precaution things that we're taking now. Or because of COVID, I get home and I take off my mask because for some days I was wearing my mask like 4 hours straight, which is
sure.
It's not fun. I don't like it.
It's not fun, and it's not that comfortable either.
It's not comfortable. Thankfully, I got my new mask, which is comfortable, but even as comfortable as it is, you don't realize how constricting the breathing is and stuff until you take it off and you take a breath and you're like, oh, life is so much easier like this. So yeah. It is, I gotta say, I sometimes now miss just working from home. So it's sort of switched back. When we were locked at home for 100 plus days, I was feeling like, gosh, I just want to change the scenery. I just want to get out and do things and not, and try to do some income producing work. We've been focusing on strategy and shoring up the building blocks of our business, et cetera. And now that I'm out there able to do showings and meet buyers and stuff, I'm kind of like, I could take, if I have a day where I don't have to go into the city, I'm like, oh, I don't have to go into the city today. And, I think it really revolves around the mask. It really sort of changes, especially when it's been as hot as it has,
Yeah, it's very warm. Mm-hmm.
So if somebody watching has not been in Manhattan when it's 90, 95 degrees and humid out.
That's our worst time.
Picture walking around in a big brick oven. Everything you get heat from the cement that you are surrounded by constantly. So it really is uncomfortable. And then you go down into the subway because we're subway junkies.
And it's a steam bath. It's like being in a steam room.
So it was a tiring week. And now being in the recovery since June 22nd, now being over a month away. It's interesting because now we're starting to get to the point where, okay, we've got numbers of weeks under our belts. We can start to see, what does that mean? Like, how is the market really responding, moving, et cetera? But we'll get into that. But how was your week, John?
It flew by. The week flew by. And again, I think that we're doing what we can do, and that we are working through a myriad of problems on the transactions that we have. We've gotten some clarity on one of them, finally a closing date, because a stock certificate came in. And then we have no resolve on another transaction. Yet next week we're supposed to close, I believe 3 transactions are closing next week. There is movement. We're also listing more. So we have, I believe, 2 more listings that hit the market, and we're counseling, we're bringing the prices down where we can. Again, you said last week that you were disappointed with the numbers of requests to show the apartments. And that is still the same.
Yeah.
That we also, through our company, have learned of the exorbitant amount of rental listings on the market. So 14,000 rental listings on the market, that's a lot of inventory. So the prices are going to have to come down. And what we've been beginning to do is to counsel the landlords to bring those prices down and bring them down. And the tenants have the say. We're going to also have that conversation with the sellers as well. And we've talked about it. The apartments that have gotten the most activity have had price reduction, and not just simple small slices, but substantial price reductions. We have also a deal on one of the properties that has outdoor space that's moving along. Yeah. And so we're doing what we can. And so, again, I agree with you. I think I was in the city 4 days this week, and now coming in with the mask and everything, and with the exception of the fact that my hand sanitizer in the subway, I didn't even tell you this, and I was fully dressed. I had 2 different buyers that day, and I'm in the subway car. And I noticed that because sometimes the condensation in the subway is really intense and it drips. So I'm standing by the door and I look down, and it must have been dripping all over my leg onto my shoe, because my shoe is totally soaked, and my pant leg. So I'm like, oh, God, and I'm looking up and I can't see anything, but I move to the opposite side of the subway car. And as I do, I notice my bag is dripping. So I had a full bottle of hand sanitizer, that smelly stuff. And here it had opened and it was dripping out the entire thing in my bag. So it was all hand sanitizer. Needless to say, my pants are at the dry cleaner and I've got to get my shoes shined. So that was my calamity. But yeah, that's life in the new abnormal. So it's about continuing to find balance and service the sellers and the buyers that we have.
But yeah, I think this is going to be our new normal. This is going to be for some time here. I think we're seeing a couple of things. One, anybody that had a way to get out of the city has gotten out of the city. And many of our young professional clients that we have, and not so young professional clients that work in the city, their offices are closed I have some closed through the end of the year. Well, if you don't have to be in the city right now, why would you necessarily be there? You can't go to restaurants and dine inside. You can't go to any cultural things, museums, shows on Broadway. So New York is essentially still shut down. What draws people to New York and what people love about New York in terms of the things to do. So that in and of itself is a huge reason why we've seen such a slow startup here. And I think that's going to continue. We have a couple things around the corner that annual events that happen. One is kids maybe going back to school. When that happens, hopefully those families return to New York, return to Manhattan, decide that, you know what, when we come back, we need more space. We want to sell this, buy up, whatever, because trading up it's the right time to do it if you need more space in a down market, and especially in this particular down market because the higher price points are softer yet. So the thought is you may sell a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom at a lower price. You certainly will. But when you go to buy that 3 or 4-bedroom, relatively speaking, you're going to make up for it. You're already invested in real estate, so hard asset like real estate this is the time to buy it. So it's certainly interesting, and I think through this end of this year, we've started to tell clients, you know what, it's slower than what we expected. Part of me, I was talking to a client the other night, and I said, listen, there's a dichotomy in my brain. On one side, I have my business, and if we're not transacting, we're not making money, right? Our business isn't making any money. So on that front, I'm disappointed in what's transpiring right now. On the other hand, I'm a human being that values life, that values the sanctity of life, and everybody, trying to be responsible and push through this horrible disease, this horrible pandemic. And so part of me is glad that everybody's not rushing back to the city to try to force it back to some sort of normal. And those two things compete with one another. At the end of the day, it would be worse for our business if everybody did the latter and everybody rushed in and we had a resurgence and another shutdown. So if you think about it in that terms, they run together. So it's an interesting time just from that perspective. And we just have to, like you said earlier, we have to just keep pushing forward, and we will keep listing these properties. We have to keep our sellers up to date on exactly what's going on, which is, one of the points of this podcast is to kind of get our up to the minute ideas and thoughts on the market. And I think, I was hoping for a little bit more activity, but it is what it is, and we just have to keep going.
One of the things that we've been effective at doing is effectively pivoting with the buyer's change of heart. I've talked about 3 different buyers that I've had worked with, one of whom is now in contract. The middle people got bid out, and now the husband was concerned about living in Manhattan, and the wife dug her heels in and said, no, we're staying. And they were looking for a rental. Well, lo and behold, which we put them in the rental. So Pat helped me with that, is getting them signed up regarding a rental. They're very happy. They'll be in the rental for a year. And then the wife said to me, of course, John, we'll buy, and we'll buy with you. So we serviced the client very well, and they're very, very happy. And I'm continuing to work with the third buyer actively. Again, a building which is not allowing us to see the real estate. And they have a board meeting, but I'm counseling the buyer. And in the meantime, I'm taking the buyer. So they have a bid in on a property in a building that they cannot see. And then we're continuing to show them additional properties. And now the husband, I had worked with the wife for over a year. Now the husband is fully engaged. So that tells me they're going to buy something. And they've reassured me that they want to buy. They're staying in Manhattan for the rest of their lives. And that's really, really, really good.
What's really encouraging, and I think you said this as well, is that I have a number of buyers that are out of the city right now. And because they don't need to work, they don't need to go into their office or anything like that. They can work remotely. But what I hear from them is, we're not going anywhere. We're just going somewhere in the short term while this all figures out. But we're coming back to New York, and we are going to buy something. It's not really a matter of if, it's only a matter of when.
Right.
That's a very encouraging to me that, okay, like it reinforces that there are still people that want to live here. There are, because there's people that are out there that are like, oh, mass exodus from the city.
Of course.
Yeah, some people are leaving the city. They're probably people that were already had one foot out the door, or people that weren't sold on living here anyways, because it is a very tough, very expensive place to live, and not everybody likes it. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
What we love about New York City, that doesn't ring true for everybody. Not everybody wants to live here. That totally makes sense. But it's reassuring to hear from our clients that, oh, we're not like leaving New York City. We're going to
Sure.
come back to New York City. It's just a matter of this all needs to be figured out a little bit more before that happens.
You'd never be able to tell the difference between a co-op or a condo by just walking in. It's the behind-the-scenes aspects that make them different, from taxes, privacy, subletting policies, and pricing to ease of transfer and ease of use. There are certainly things to know before purchasing either property type. In this next segment, John and Jonathan give you a glimpse into the explanation they would give to a new buyer.
The topic for today is the difference between co-ops and condos. And when I say co-ops, I mean cooperatives, housing cooperatives.
Traditionally, Manhattan was rental world until, really until almost the 1980s.
Even before then, like the 60s, 70s were when they started the co-ops, right? Some of them?
Yeah. But I'm saying the mass push for cooperatives
in the 80s,
in the 1980s.
Yeah.
So most of these co-ops we go into, I don't know what the statistic is, but having worked in so many co-ops, it feels like 50-60% of them were converted in the 1980s from rental buildings at large. That's mostly what they was rental buildings. So, and now those co-ops take up about 65-70% of our market. Now, that doesn't mean that 65-70% of what's on the market are cooperatives. The traditional co-op, you and I will explain it to a new buyer. It's like joining a country club. They really have the ultimate right to accept you or deny your application. Of course, they're not supposed to violate any fair housing laws. They can't discriminate against you based on your race, color, creed, sexual orientation, familial status. They also don't have to tell you why they deny your application. So it makes it a little bit tricky. The additional thing those traditional co-ops were the last one was probably in the early 90s that actually converted to a co-op or was built as a co-op. Anything since then really has been a condominium.
The form of ownership, like you had said, it's not deeded property. It's like buying a share of stock in a corporation.
Right. Yeah.
But it's a stock and a lease certificate. So it's a leasehold interest. But for all intents and purposes in New York City, it is a form of ownership, a form of home ownership. And most purchasers will be in housing cooperatives versus condominium. For instance, a young guy who's never owned a piece of real estate was referred to me, and I gave him a real estate 101 lesson. And I did talk about, on our 6 Mile Island, most of the units are going to be rentals, and then then cooperatives and condo/townhouses in terms of the sales units. And then I explained the corporation aspect of a housing co-op. And as you were saying, the 65% of the marketplace as being co-op, 65 to 70% versus condominium. And I talk about the leasehold interest versus the deeded property in a condominium. When one buys in a housing cooperative, and they tend to be, because there are more of them, anywhere between 15 to 25, 30% lower than condominiums. And the first-time buyers, if they're looking below $1 million, for a one-bedroom home, I say, well, you have to look then in a cooperative. So based on the pricing, because the condos will price higher than the co-ops. So I kind of walk them into it. But then a corporation, like in any corporation, has a board of directors. And when one buys in the co-op, you are at the dictate of the corporation, the bylaws of the corporation, and you must be approved by the corporation to own the stock and the lease. You get a stock and a lease certificate, and you own shares in the corporation. And in so doing, you pay what is called maintenance, which includes your common charges and your taxes, as well as your common charges encompasses all of the services of the building, et cetera. and you pay a monthly maintenance to own that apartment. And they can be extremely restrictive. So some people don't like that. Other people do like it because you know who your neighbors are. You are not in a building with investors. You are in a building with other like-minded owners who take pride in their corporation. But it can be a very intrusive way of buying a home. It's not like buying a home in the suburbs. You must provide everything, all details about your life. So everything from full financial statement with verification of your assets, 2 years of tax returns, completed tax returns, all sorts of boilerplate information, personal, professional, bank references, etc. They want to know everything about you. As you said, and I agree, and then I always use the expression, it's like buying in a country club. Once you're in the club, it's all fine, but there are steps which need to be taken, far more, and the package is yay thick. They run credit, then they actually interview you to come to possibly be a member of the building, a member of the corporation. So in a condominium, it's very different than that. There is a board of managers. So there is a board in the condo, but it's run, in my opinion, I would say much more, I don't know if I want to say the word lenient, but the benefit to being in a condominium is that there is no formal interview for your board. There is a package these days, and these condominiums can be rather intrusive as well, depending on where one buys. But
frankly, some of the condominium packages are as invasive, if not more, than the most lenient co-ops out there. So that's one of the big misnomers out there.
That's correct. But also in a condo, even though a few co-ops will allow foreign ownership, they don't like to have foreign ownership. Many of the cooperatives do not allow what's called a pied-à-terre, a second home. They do not allow parent buying for a working child, or co-purchasing, or gifting, or guarantors. So it's very restrictive, certain co-ops. Condominium, whatever you would like to do, for the most part, you can do, provided you get your financing. You're a foreign entity. You want to buy in the name of a corporation, and so you own the four walls, but you don't know who your neighbors are going to be. So there's pros and cons to both. Condo, you can rent your apartment out right away. In a cooperative, very restrictive. Some co-ops, no rentals. Other ones, after 1 to 2 years of ownership, you can rent out your apartment, but again, for maybe a 1 to 2 year period, and then you've got to come back to reside.
There's really two main differences between a co-op and a condo that usually get people to decide which route they want to take. Value aside, like you mentioned, there's obviously the value, 15 to 30%, maybe even more, between a co-op and a condo. But really it boils down to two things: ease of transfer, ease of use. So ease of transfer, like you mentioned, anybody can buy in a condo, foreigners, entities, trusts, LLCs. You can buy an apartment for your daughter to live there, your son to live there, whatever. It doesn't really matter. If you have the money, the seller accepts your offer. The only thing a condo can do to stop you is they have what's called the right of first refusal. They have to basically buy the apartment under the same terms and conditions as that purchaser. And it never happens. I've never heard of it happening. But what it is there for is to make sure that I'm not selling my apartment to my brother for half the price. Because then the condo could decide, you know what, let's just buy it ourselves and we'll flip it and it will make sense, But so it is there as a backstop, but never seen it utilized before. So that's ease of transfer, co-op versus condo. Co-op's going to restrict all those entities. It's going to want you, more than likely, 98% of the time, you have to take it in your personal name, and you have to buy it as a primary residence. Is probably 50% of the time they won't allow a pied-à-terre situation. So that's the ease of transfer. Ease of use is condos, like you mentioned, you can rent them out from day one. The only restriction usually in a condo on subletting your apartment would be to make sure that it's a 1 year lease, a 12-month lease. That's really the only thing. They want a 30-day. You can't Airbnb
not a
it
hotel
out for less than a 12-month lease. A co-op will say a very typical co-op sublet policy would be after you own it for a couple of years, you can rent it for say 2 years out of every 5. So it allows you flexibility if you get relocated for your work for a little bit or something like that, or you need to go take care of a family member for a couple years and you want to rent it out, or you're just not ready to sell it because you might come back. You can rent it, but then after 2 years, they're out and you have to either just carry the apartment or move back in or whatever, but you can't rent it out. So those are really the two things that I say are the biggest reasons that or ways to think about it. If somebody say, listen, I don't care about renting it out. I never want to be a landlord. Okay, fine. Condo doesn't matter in that regard. And then obviously the big kicker is the value difference between. For that ease of transfer and that ease of use, you pay for it. You pay that extra 15 to 30% more on a price per square foot basis. Living in them, you would never know the difference. You can't walk into a building and go, oh, obviously this is a co-op or a condo. They function basically the same in terms of there's a board, like you said, there's which governs what happens in the building when they renovate the lobby and so on and so forth. Doing a renovation, I hear all the time people are like, oh, well, doing a renovation in a co-op, essentially they're the same. Yes, a co-op, they have a few things that may be a little bit more stringent, but that actually leads more to the age of co-op buildings versus the age of condominium buildings. Generally speaking, co-ops are much older buildings. So the much older buildings, for instance, don't have many times the plumbing infrastructure to support washers and dryers. So that leads people to believe like it's harder to do things in a co-op, and it's not really lending to because it's a co-op. It's generally because it's an older building. But you still have to use licensed and insured people. You have to submit plans if you're doing big changes, et cetera, et cetera. So the actual function, once you own it in a co-op or a condo, functionally, they're very, very similar. So those are the differences. And then of course it gets down to when you start to put pen to paper and you look at black and white, the big deciding factor sometimes is financially, whether somebody's going to qualify financially to buy in a co-op. You're, as you said, and I mentioned earlier, it's buying into a private club. Technically, your title is a tenant shareholder. You're not an owner, you're a tenant shareholder. You're buying shares of that corporation. And what comes with those shares, which is divvied up basically when the building converts to a co-op, it runs straight in line with what you would expect the values to increase. So it runs in line with how big the apartment is, what the exposure is, how high in the building it is, et cetera. So basically, the more valuable the apartment, the higher number of shares you have. Very rarely is there a shifting of those number of shares, although we have seen. But so as a tenant shareholder, let's say you get 100 shares. What comes along with those shares is a proprietary lease for that specific section of the building that those shares are allotted to. So everything's divvied up on a per share basis in a co-op, which is why maintenance, as you mentioned, in a co-op, it's referred to, your monthly cost is referred to as a maintenance charge. That includes the running of the building, your share to pay the doorman, the door staff, the resident manager, the accountant, the attorney, the building engineer, general upkeep of everything, all the local law 11 taxes, real estate taxes, all lumps in. All the a co-op building gets one real estate tax bill, and it's a simple calculation. There's 1,000 shares. You divide by 1,000, multiply how many shares you get. So it's pretty cut and dry when it comes to that structure side of it. And in a condo, everybody it's divvied up between common charges, which pay for all the workings of the building, the management company, et cetera, all the staff. And then each individual owner, because it's considered real property, also gets their own real estate tax bill. Each unit has its own block and lot, and each owner gets its own real estate tax bill. So the only additional thing that I wanted to add to it, which sometimes gets lost in the mix, is that your closing costs also on a co-op are much cheaper than a condominium. So because it's not deemed real property by the city, by the state, what you don't have is your title insurance and your mortgage recording tax on a co-op, which can be a significant amount. I mean, the mortgage recording tax is almost 2% of your financed amount, and the title insurance is a long calculation, but it's starts somewhere around 0.5% of the purchase price. So you not only save on the ultimate purchase price, you're going to be 15 to 30% lower, but you're also going to save significantly on your closing costs. So what has become more popular, certainly since you and I have been in real estate, is the notorious flip tax. So the flip tax is a building or a co-op imposed fee, transfer fee. So it's a line item on their income, on their balance sheet at the end of the year, in their P&L, where how much money did you make due to maintenance? How much money did you make on this thing that's been deemed a flip tax? It's a little hard, like flip tax really isn't the right term, but it's really more of a transfer tax. And it's really just another way for the building to get income and so they'll say, and I've
corporate tax. Corporate tax.
A corporate tax. We've seen it as a function of profit, where it's a formulaic thing, where they say, okay, we're going to say it's 5% of your net profit. And there's all things that you can discount from that calculation, to as high as 3 or 4% of the purchase price, which can be exorbitant when you're talking about a $5 million, $10 million apartment. But the way I explain it to people is if the co-op didn't have a flip tax, the maintenance would be higher. It's the same thing as when a managing agent says, we're going to now impose a recognition agreement fee. When you're like, what does that mean? It's basically to process a piece of paper, look at it and go, yeah, that's right. But they just figured out something else to charge for. And if it wasn't for that, it'd be for something else. So it's just another line item on their income. I mean, listen, it's obviously very complicated. That was a brief overview of kind of the main differences between them. So much more goes into it. And usually, I don't know, you're probably very similar, but when you meet with a client for the first time and you start to give them the overview of co-ops versus condos, is usually a big part of that conversation. Usually takes about an hour to get through all of it.
Oh yeah.
And then by the end of it, they're like, they only reach about 10% of it, and it's
they like the lesson.
Yeah.
They like hearing about it.
Well, it's certainly it goes back to what we've said many times. It's certainly interesting. I don't know in the best way. So listen, the best thing is that if somebody has more questions, obviously reach out to us. We can talk about more specifics. Want to know, there's hybrids, these things called condops, which are land lease buildings. There's all sorts of real estate tax things, co-op condo tax abatement, et cetera.
I have an idea. Why don't we talk about the taxes next podcast?
We could.
It's an idea. If anybody has any questions, we are here. That's what we do, to answer questions about real estate, about co-ops, condos, taxes, etc. And so I thought you did a very good job. It's really, really refreshing to know that my business partner knows what a difference between a co-op and a condo is, because if you didn't, we'd have serious problems.
I'm not sure, John. You go first so that I can just reiterate what you said.
Trust me, I dealt with a veteran real estate agent one time, maybe 5 years ago, and I was talking to her about my client's financial statement. And this was a really good, substantial broker. And she said to me, you know, John, I really don't deal with the financial statements. That's what my assistant does. I was like, what? I had a wonderful time talking to you as usual. We don't get to talk that much anymore. Just kidding.
Oh, it was good talking to you, John. You are always a fountain of information, and it was
Just come to me. I got these answers at my fingertips.
I got spades of answers. So nice to see everybody. Hopefully we talk soon. Everybody be safe, be healthy. Check us out.
And most of all, remain in gratitude, right?
Remain in gratitude. We will see you next week.
Have a great weekend.
Thanks for watching or listening to the John and Jonathan Sell NYC podcast, where experienced expert New York City real estate brokers John Gastaska and Jonathan Conlon break down what's happening in the market, what you need to know whether you're a buyer, seller, or agent, and their insight into the future with a little bit of fun along the way. If you'd like to take a look at our listings, have a property you're thinking of selling, or are wondering if we could help you finally find the perfect place to call home, feel free to reach out. You can email us at info@johnandjonathansellnyc.com or reach out via our Facebook page or Instagram at John and Jonathan Sell NYC. If you enjoyed today's podcast, consider telling a friend or family member about it or leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. Those are some of the best ways of supporting our efforts, and we would greatly appreciate it. Thank you again for tuning in. We can't wait to share what's coming up next. Subscribe to the podcast to make sure you don't miss our next episode, and we'll see you next time.